Good afternoon, health seekers. Welcome to another episode of the Keto Podcast with myself, Richard Smith, Alan Reeves, and today we are joined with Robert, aka Keto Savage from the States. So welcome, Robert. Thanks for coming on board.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be chatting with you all today.
Excellent.
Wicked, good to see you, bro.
It's been something Alan and I have been chatting about for a long time, isn't it, Al? So
yeah,
well overdue. Well overdue. I'll leave you kick things off.
Well, Robert was my coach when I did my first bodybuilding competition back 5 years ago. I'd been keto at that time about 2.5 years before I started getting lean, and then Robert took me to the extreme lean that I managed to win both shows that year with his help and guidance. And then ever since that, of course, I've remained keto ever since. Slightly different angle for me, as we'll talk about during this, but that's how I got to know Robert. I was on his podcast and I said, one day you'll be on mine. So here we are.
It's crazy to think that it was 5 years ago, man. I didn't realize that had been that long.
Yeah, I was 45 then, and now I'm 50.
Well, you keep getting better every year, man. So you're doing something
Thanks,
right.
man. I keep taking the butter.
There you go.
I like it.
So, of course, I wanted to talk today about the ketogenic bodybuilding, because so many bodybuilders would have you say that it can't be done. It's not good for you. You can't sustain it, and you can't build muscle on keto. That's the oldest one in the book, if you will. So what's your thoughts on that, Robert? Because you just wrote a book called Ketogenic Bodybuilding.
Yes, I've been doing strict keto now for about 8 years. I competed. I did all the traditional bro dieting techniques beforehand. I mean, I started bodybuilding, I guess, about 14 years ago. I was super skinny. I was 115 pounds. Now bulked up with a bunch of carbohydrates, but it was not really a good weight. Like, I put on a bunch of muscle, but I put on a ton of fat in the process. And then for me, dieting down really aggressively, losing a bunch of fat, but also losing a bunch of muscle, and then just seeing massive shifts in my scale weight really kind of led to a bunch of disordered eating tendencies. So that was not sustainable physically or psychologically for me. So I started doing keto in 2015, I believe. And that was before keto was really popular, but I just stuck with it, competed in 2017, earned my pro card status then, and I've just stayed strict keto ever since then. And every time I've done a prep in that time frame, I've gotten better. I'm looking at my physique. I'm very analytical and objective with my progress pictures, my stats, and I continue to put muscle on year after year and minimize the excess fat that I'm putting on. So the argument that you can't build muscle with a ketogenic approach in the absence of carbohydrates, I feel I've dispelled that myth quite well over the past.
But I've
8 years.
seen you training on your Instagram, and you're getting stronger.
Yeah.
Your deadlifts getting bigger, your squats getting, and if you're getting stronger, you have to be adding muscle. You can't be getting weaker and add muscle. That makes no sense to me. So how do you add muscle without carbohydrates? You're proving that it's possible.
Yeah.
And
So,
of
I
course,
mean,
let me say one thing. Sorry, you're natural.
Yeah. Totally natural. Have been since I started lifting.
That's important.
That is definitely an important caveat there. When it comes to building muscle, it's pretty much just distilled down to making sure you're taking enough calories, enough fuel to supply your body with ample nutrition and building blocks to add more tissue, enough training stimuli to subject it to a reason to add more tissue, and then enough protein and enough recovery time. Like, if you check those 4 boxes, then you will build muscle. And carbohydrates was not one of those 4 boxes. So in a building phase, I'm just simply trying to make sure that I'm pushing the envelope with protein consumption, caloric consumption, training load, and then trying to get myself ample rest. The rest is probably where I suffer most, because I've got multiple, plates in the year. I've got multiple businesses I'm running. I've got a 1-year-old
You have
now.
a baby, yeah.
The sleep aspect is probably where I suffer the most, but everything else I've pretty well got dialed in the building phase, and I continue to put on strength and muscle every year.
Amazing. And I always say it's intensity of effort that grows muscle. It's the stimuli of the actual contraction and taking it to failure in a desired rep range. That's the intense that grows muscle. And you don't grow anything in the gym. You only break it in the gym. You grow it in your sleep. And again, that's where nutrition comes in. And carbohydrates, as you said, it's not essential for muscle building either. So when it comes to dieting, because you're in prep now, I know you only do prep every couple of years, 2 or 3 years. What's your take on prep? Because I know how you prep me. Is it still the same? Are you still high fat, low protein?
So I modulate it quite a bit throughout the course of a prep. So I'll start at a high fat ratio, about 80% of my calories coming from fat, but I'm starting pretty close to my maintenance intake. So there's not really a massive drop in calories right at the onset. From that high fat percentage, I start gradually titrating my protein up and my dietary fat down until I reach my own unique protein threshold, which for me is usually around 200, 210, 15 grams of protein. I'm at a body weight of about 800 or 180 pounds rather. So, I'm taking in a pretty high protein at that point. In the building phase, I'm oftentimes pushing 225, 250 grams of protein. So I'm not really low protein by any means. But at the onset of a prep, I do have that high fat ratio at the onset. And then as I reach that protein threshold, I start titrating both fat and protein down. So all the while calories are dropping, but depending on how far in the prep I am, I may have a higher fat ratio or a relatively higher protein ratio. My protein as a percentage of total calories never exceeds that of my dietary fat intake, but I still consume ample protein for sure. I'm never advocating for low protein per se.
Yeah. Interesting. So when you say 1 month out from a show, you would be lower. You wouldn't be at 80% fat. You would then be, or you still would be 80% fat, but you'd be lower calorie total.
Yeah, when I'm in like the month of the show, so I'll start with the higher fat ratio, and then about halfway through the prep, I'm closer to 65% of calories coming from fat, somewhere in there. So pretty close to a 1-to-1 on fat grams to protein grams. And then I start, as the tail end of the prep commences, dropping protein and fat. So it winds up being a higher fat ratio there at the very end. Usually for me, around 75, 78% total calories coming from fat. And that's for a very finite period of time. So that, when you're in a prep, the objective is no longer to build muscle so much as it is to preserve the muscle tissue you've built up to that point. You're not really set to optimize muscle building because your calories are lower. So I have found it to be more muscle sparing if I maintain a relatively high dietary fat ratio as a percentage of total calories, because that's going to ramp up my ketone production, which is anti-catabolic. It's also going to help stabilize my hormones, which are going to be allowing me to, maintain higher testosterone levels. Plus, I'm getting energy in from that dietary fat, which allows me to train harder. And that training stimulus in the context of those lower calories allows me to preserve that lean tissue as well. Wow. So most bodybuilders come from this belief system that you have to have, 300 plus grams of protein there at the end to preserve muscle. But I honestly lost much more muscle when I used to do that higher protein, because I walked around like a zombie. My testosterone was tanked. I just felt like shit, and it was not sustainable for me. I preserve more lean tissue now by consuming much less protein as a percentage of total calories.
Super interesting. What do you think, Richard? Because you do it differently. You would do it more traditional towards the last month.
You say traditionally, but coming back to what Robert just said in regards to the 1-to-1 ratio, I tend to eat as nature intended. So if we look at an egg contains almost equal grams of protein as it does fat. So 6, depending on the size of the egg, obviously, 6 grams of fat that's protein, to about 5 grams of fat. A piece of steak is roughly the same as far as percentages go. Chicken breast with the skin on, a piece of salmon. So nature provides us with this perfectly packaged present of protein and fat. And that's how I consume my protein. I consume it in conjunction with fat. I tend not to add fat to my diet in order to increase caloric intake. I don't add double cream to my coffee the way that I used to, very rarely at all anymore. I've gravitated into mostly carnivore. So I've come away predominantly now from all of the extra add-ons, as it were, and eat predominantly meat-based. But that ratio is pretty much the same as Robert's prep would begin. That's how I maintain all the way through training and prep comp. But what I would do in conjunction of cutting towards a comp, there's a few key things that I'd hit to make sure that I fire on all cylinders. One is the metabolic window, or metabolic reset, sorry. I don't know if this is something you guys have implemented before, but the metabolic reset is roughly about 4 hours. As long as we activate leucine, which comes back to the effect of insulin and allowing us to build muscle. And as you rightly said, protein builds muscle. Carbs do not build muscle, but it's the effect on the insulin that people believe is what is the driving force behind that muscle gain. But we can gain muscle with just protein, but protein itself is only going to build muscle to a point, because the muscle cells need fat, they need lipid in order to grow, to stretch. So they need that for hypertrophy. So this is why protein and fat is the magic elixir. Carbohydrates and protein does not increase muscle protein synthesis compared to adequate protein alone. But what does increase muscle protein synthesis is the co-ingestion of protein and fat. And this is something that we've mentioned a few times, isn't it, Al, during the talks and podcasts and the speaking events that we've done. So all of those aspects are spot on, identical, to that point. My prep, I tend to do a lot quicker. I try to do my prep over a shorter period of time. This I find is a good tool for bodybuilding, because people need longer preps on a standard diet. But if we can prep quicker, we can build for a longer period of time, which means we're spent less time prepping and more time building. But I would go to a more drastic extreme. So I would lower my dietary fat in order to ramp up my endogenous fat burning. So as you say, there is a level there. There's a fine dance between maintaining an active ketone level, so you can maintain this mental clarity as well and this energy in the gym, because I do falter towards the end of a prep. The last week or 2 weeks before prep, I feel half dead. But then my paper my skin is paper thin. So it is, I think.
You see, when Robert, sorry to interrupt, prepped me for my first show doing keto, I don't remember being hungry. I don't remember suffering on peak week. I thought, if this is peak week, pretty easy. And back at the show, I see everybody was obviously munching on their gummy bears and donuts and whatever. And I was having a tin of anchovies. And that was his idea. And everyone's looking at you thinking, that stinks. he's weird. But then the veins started popping, and you drink some water. And this one guy was almost fainting and pain with cramp in his calf. He was licking an ice cube because he didn't want to drink some water. And there was me with my liter of water and salt. And so I never had no ill effects at all. So have bodybuilders got it wrong all this last 40 years?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is the way that it was done, before our time, wasn't it? And it's almost come away from that in pursuit of carbs. But we certainly don't need carbs. It's not something I put in at all in my diet. I don't cycle anymore. I've experimented, as you have, Al, with cyclical keto.
I've changed so many times, and I think it's important to try and test what works for you and what doesn't work for you, because I've done from the massive carb refeeds of Saturday and Sunday, more the anabolic diet that was invented in the 90s by Pasquale. I've done that. And then I found the headaches too much on a Monday if you couldn't quite get your electrolytes right. But I was back ketogenic, though, by Monday morning after 1,000 grams of carbs. I still had 0.5 by Monday morning. So I was very adapted, but still the headaches would come. So then I switched it to one day. Now I'm at a point, I might have one meal of some rice, like some sushi a week.
Yeah.
That's it. And a little bit of fruit come the summer. I've always loved fruit, and I don't think fruit is inherently bad for you. It's the the poison's in the dose, isn't it? And you don't really overeat fruit unless you're drinking smoothies all day long.
Yeah.
So do you eat fruit?
The carbs. Like there's a lot of people that want to point me out as a dogmatic, strict keto guy. But honestly, like I was doing all this carbohydrate intake and super high protein and all of these experiments long before I ever went keto. And then I found keto by doing carbohydrate backloading developed by John Kiefer. It was basically keto during the day and then a ton of high glycemic index carbs at night. So I was doing these carb ups and I just never felt better than when I was doing strict keto in the complete absence of carbohydrates. And a lot of people say you'll never be able to fill out and fully replenish muscle glycogen and achieve the level of vascularity that you would with carbs. But I have found that once you get deeply fat adapted, I mean, your body, there's been studies that prove this, your body's ability to replenish muscle glycogen improves and preserve muscle glycogen improves. So I'll be training next to people that are consuming carbohydrates or competing with people that consume carbohydrates. And without fail, I'm running circles around them. I've got more energy than them. I've got better vascularity than them, thinner skin than them, more of a filled out, pumped look. So I'm just not sold on the requirement from carbohydrates to peak properly standpoint.
Yeah, I agree. I've experimented with both, but coming back to one of the points you just made there, the body does upregulate that lactic acid system, doesn't it? And it increases our body's ability to recycle lactate in the form of glycogen in a keto adapted athlete at a much higher rate than a carb athlete. So we can and do carry muscle glycogen in our muscles despite not consuming any carbohydrates, which is incredible. But one of the things that I used to do, and coming back to what you just said, Robert, about this this image that we have to be one or the other. The beauty of living the lifestyle as long as we have is that we are metabolically flexible. So we can live a ketogenic lifestyle. We can consume our meats and fats. But then if we were to put a little bit of carbohydrate in, it has very little effect on our body's ability to maintain a ketogenic
compared
state.
to your standard American diet or standard English diet. The amount of carbs that I've had in the last 5 years is probably equates to somebody who eats in a week from 5 years. And now, I mean, Robert's, of course, known me for 5 years, and I update my pictures to him every now and again. And I've remained as lean while growing muscle all the time over the last 5 years. And now at 50, I've got more muscle now than ever before. And I'm still probably sub 10% body fat. And this proves that keto, to me, I've never felt healthier. And that's what I'm trying to teach people now. So if we can go away from the bodybuilding to how it helps normal people, because now we're all dads. People are going to, even Robert's a dad, they're going to get these dad bods. So, and this is I made a post today, how I can help these guys to remove the dad bods, because they're getting younger and younger and they're really suffering with diabetes and obesity at a younger age now. So the dad bods, you've got to go keto.
Yeah. It's weird. People, I don't know, like when you're younger, you want to work out to impress the girls, and then like life happens. You have a career path, you have a job, you're working a lot of the hours of the day, you get kids, you get married, all these things, and people just look for scapegoats and reasons to not invest that much time to the gym and be as meticulous with your nutrition. But if you just stop eating the shit food and are active, like you don't have to be a pro bodybuilder to maintain a healthy physique and a healthy composition. I mean, I have several clients. Y'all probably have several clients that are not competitive, like they're not competing, but they look fantastic, and they're doing it seemingly effortlessly by simply putting proper routines into habit and into place on a day-to-day basis. Like when you can find a diet that is healthy and you're able to sustain it every single day without fail, that's the recipe for success right there.
So what do you think about, and I've heard Thomas DeLauer say you shouldn't stay in ketosis long term. It's good to cycle out. And he cycles out for weeks at a time, he said. Do we agree with that statement? Because that makes no sense to me.
I don't agree. No. I like Thomas DeLauer. We're totally cordial. Like I've had him on the podcast. I think I've had him on the podcast. Like we're totally cool. We see each other at conferences. But I do not subscribe to the mentality that you have to cycle out. That just makes no sense from a an evolutionary standpoint as to what we consumed going through our past. It makes no sense from a physiological or biological standpoint. A lot of the arguments towards cycling out are from people that suggest if you want to reach true metabolic flexibility, you have to give your body a mix of both. But the thing is, your body does not forget how to use glucose. Like if I was to reintroduce sugar right now, yes, there may be like a 48-hour transitionary period where my body would have some headaches. I would retain some fluid. It'd be kind of like keto flu in reverse, but then all those systems upregulate almost within a day or two. And then I'm back to processing that glucose efficiently. And I'm able to still metabolize the fat quite well as well. So you don't need to cycle the carbs back in to maintain some degree of metabolic
What you may suffer with though is when the microbiome changes. I remember having some bread the first time after strict keto, after the show actually, and I was in agony for 4 hours just from a little bit. So I think the wheat was damaging to me. I couldn't digest it anymore. So I didn't forget how to do the glucose, but the wheat killed me.
Yeah. The microbiome should upregulate though within about 2 weeks. So I mean, if you were to reintroduce the carbohydrates, I would say that within 2 weeks, your body is fully functional again. So for me, it's not worth it. I don't find any benefit in having those carbohydrates. So why would I want to subject myself to that 2-week transitionary period anyways?
And why would you want to put it in from bread? Is another question.
Exactly. Well, it's a reward thing, and it's an addiction thing, and it's going for an Indian meal it's a bad habit to break. And now I haven't eaten bread in years actually, but I used to love sandwiches. That was one of my staple daily occurrences, 2 or 3 packets of sandwiches before keto. So that was my go-to snack. And now if I had a carb day, I still wouldn't have any bread. It's gone. The addiction is gone. So what about the new one, which is maybe not new, but it's new. Obviously, carnivore is new, but the danger of plants that it's doing to us, the lectins in plants that some guys talk about, because keto can be a lot of salads, can be a lot of vegetables. And now, which way should we go? Is that healthy?
I think there's a lot of fear mongering going on right now when it comes to what all the dangers are. I mean, I'm not a strict hardcore carnivore by any means, but I mean, 99% of what I eat is carnivore. So like, depending on
99, that's pretty high.
Yeah. I mean, depending on how loosely you want to define carnivore, I'm pretty well in that realm as well. I'll have a plate of Brussels sprouts or broccoli every couple of weeks or every month or two, just because I want the change in flavor and texture. I don't think that they're benefiting my performance whatsoever or my hormonal health. I just like having a little bit of that. Plus, I'm starting to garden now, so I kind of like to be able to, reap what I sow, so to speak. But this notion that plants are out to kill us, I don't really think that is correct either. Now, do I think there are certainly a vast demographic of people that have sensitivities and probably shouldn't be consuming those things? Absolutely. But do I think a plate of broccoli every random moment is going to...
That's a very good point, because it's probably not, maybe it's not the plants that's killing us, because there is toxins in plants, but their gut linings are so destroyed from the chemicals that they've been eating on the bread, on the flour, on the plants, the pesticides. I'm reading Wheat Belly at the moment, and wheat is completely genetically different than it was 50 years ago.
It is completely different. It's even when we look at gluten, though, isn't it? I mean, there's lots of different types of lectins in the form of wheat germ agglutinin. And wheat germ agglutinin doesn't get the airtime that gluten does, but it does still cause that intestinal permeability, doesn't it? Through the release of that molecule zonulin. So it causes that gap in the tight junction between the epithelial cells, and that allows all the undigested protein molecules to travel into the bloodstream where they shouldn't be. The body sees them as a foreign invader and creates antibodies to fight them. And then through a process called molecular mimicry, the body then starts attacking other proteins in the body that look the same. But again, it's this initial phase of this wheat germ agglutinin or gluten or other forms of lectins that have caused that. And circling back to what Robert just said there, I don't eat. I've recently become fairly strict carnivore, I'd say, although I've been what you would call maybe 95 to 99% carnivore for years and years. But I would still consume on maybe a monthly basis if I went out for a meal and if I had a mixed grill or a big steak dish and it came with some broccoli, I would have eaten it then. I wouldn't eat it now, but that's again only because I'm in pursuit again of superior health and nutrition, this optimal health and nutrition in whatever it is that I'm pursuing. But I do also think that it didn't impact negatively when I only had broccoli or whatever it may have been with my meal now and again. So I think there's a lot to be said for that gut lining. I think if you're coming from a place of strong intestinal health, then I don't think you're going to be as susceptible as you would be if you were consuming these foods on a daily basis, or the bread on a daily basis. And grains is the biggest thing, isn't it? So I think that bowl of broccoli on your plate, once or twice a week or once or twice a month is probably not going to cause an awful lot of damage, if anything at all. And as you say, it's not something you notice any improvement in performance gain from, but it's not something you notice a hindrance of either, So I think, the dose is in the poison, as you say, isn't it? So I think it comes down to how much of what you consume and how often. And again, coming back to the first thing you said with the carbs was, the bread. And it's like, well, why is that going to be the first port of call when it comes to carbohydrates? Because that is definitely by far the worst one you could put in, isn't it? Whereas white rice, on the other hand, is lectin free. White rice, you could eat.
That's now my go-to. I say I have some sushi or something, maybe once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks. It's not a lot, but I don't get any negative response from a little sushi on my gut-wise or feeling-wise.
And to be fair, sushi with rice does taste way better than sushi without rice.
Yeah,
it does. It does. My mother-in-law owns a sushi restaurant as well, so
it makes it easy for you.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to insult her by saying I don't want her rice.
Now, kind of going back to fiber, I'd be curious to get y'all's take on this, but there are several studies that showcase the benefit of fiber from, overall health perspective. Most of these are done in meta-analysis studies, but like Lane Norton, for instance, is a big advocate for consuming fiber. And I haven't dove into each individual study, but it seems as though they're all typically done on a demographic, on a population that is eating a mixed diet. And in that context, I would think that it makes sense that the fiber shows a correlative benefits over time, because that fiber is minimizing the assimilation and absorption of all that crap ingredient foods that people are eating in addition to the fiber. But I don't think there's been any studies that compare those eating fiber to those not, that are following a well-formulated ketogenic or carnivore diet. And I don't know if those studies will ever exist, but I would think that that's a pretty big factor, pretty big variable to account for.
Yeah, so I think it's a case of, is it a case that they are healthy because of or in spite of? People who tend to eat fiber tend to be more active. They go to the gym more often. They practice meditation and yoga. So I think the studies that I've seen, when you look into this, a lot of it is correlation. I don't consume any fiber in my diet at all anymore. A few studies have led me down that route, and it's because what is fiber when we look at fiber? Fiber is a subset of carbohydrate, and we know that we don't need carbohydrate, therefore we don't need fiber. Fiber, we are told, feeds the colonocytes in the gut. It breaks down into a short chain fatty acid and feeds the colonocytes, which it does. But it's not the only thing that feeds the colonocytes. Meat, animal protein, also breaks down into the likes of isobutyrate, isovalerate, and propionate, all short-chain fatty acids, which have been shown to feed the colonocytes in the gut at a much higher rate than butyrate from plant fiber. Then there's the whole thing that it helps with transit time, but adding cars to a traffic jam doesn't alleviate the traffic jam. It just seems to bung me up when I put fiber in, that's for sure. Yeah. And then, what else is there? The fact that it may help prevent cancers, which I think is a lot of rubbish when we look at animal proteins in particular. Study after study that is shown to cause any correlation between animal protein and cancer, bowel cancer especially, has been ripped apart several times. There was one that I was looking at recently. I think Dr. Paul Mason speaks about this, actually. He breaks it down incredibly well. He looks at 800 studies Out of this 800, I think there was something like 16. Out of that 16 that they put forward out of the 800, only something like half of those again actually showed any correlation. And then when you looked at those studies, 3 were done on rabbits or animals that don't eat meat. So what do you think is going to happen if you feed meat to an animal that is not meant to eat meat? There was another one where they injected rodents with carcinogens, fed them meat, and then said it was the meat that caused the cancer. But genuine, this is true. And the last subset of people were groups of people who were eating what they called a meat eater diet. But if you ate pizza, you were classed as a meat eater because there may be meat on your pizza. Exactly. There may be meat on your pizza. But what else is on that pizza? It's also covered in grain or made of grain and covered in vegetable oils.
Yeah, but the USA, unfortunately, say that if you have some ketchup, you've had some vegetables. But I listened to Robert's
nutrition recommendations from the USA.
Yeah, exactly. But I listened to Robert's podcast the other day with the Gerson therapy.
That was an interesting one.
Yeah. I almost threw the phone at the wall halfway through.
Yeah, I almost didn't publish that one because it's like, man, I don't agree with anything this guy says. But
I was enjoying it for 2.5 halfway, but then it got crazy that you can reverse diabetes with so much fructose and juice and cure cancer. I mean,
have 5 coffee enemas a day. That part's important.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've read a lot about this. Is how I got into this health freak with my dad's cancer 15 years ago. And I've read all about Thomas Seyfried and the metabolic theory of cancer, who is literally curing thousands of people with getting away the glucose and the glutamine. Yes, you need a drug to remove glutamine because some cancers feed on glutamine, but all cancer feeds on sugar. This guy was saying that cancer loves fat. And I mean, cancer is fermented and it just grows without oxygen. And there's also oxygen therapy with, I think it was Otto Warburg that blasted the cancers with oxygen. But yeah, it was an interesting podcast. But it's good to publish because you can't always have people on that you agree with because it's just, as you say, you get a little bit too laid back and too easy. But yeah. I didn't agree with most of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, me neither. But I did have Sam Apple, the guy that wrote Ravenous, who was all about Otto Warburg and his whole backstory and biography. Like that was a very interesting podcast and book. So if you haven't read that book, Ravenous, highly recommend it.
Yeah. Excellent. But yeah. So, I mean, me with fiber, I have the odd piece of fruit, but I don't do that thinking that I'm having fiber. I'm doing that thinking that I'm having an apple because there's an apple and the missus has bought some apples and I have an apple. I can still go to the toilet without that apple, put it that way. I don't particularly ever think I must have some fiber. I take a lot of magnesium and MCT oil. If you take as much as I do, then you have no problems going to the bathroom.
Yeah, almost to the extreme. Like I've been kind of weary of MCT oil for that very reason.
But Robert and Richard, I get confused there. I mean, his MCT oil is fantastic. Other ones have literally exploded my stomach, but his one, because he's got his own range of products as well. His one is so pure that it's no stomach problem at all. I can almost drink it as a shots.
Nice, that's good. That's what you want. A lot of supplement companies, and this is not my area of expertise, but they use like hair grade MCT oil and stuff like that for like skincare products and hair products, and they put that as a supplement to be ingested, and that's what screws a lot of people's guts up.
Right.
Yeah. And we've also brought out a range of the powder, so the MCT powder, so that's a lot better on gastro distress than the oil is. But the purity is the world's highest purity, is 99.9%. So same as you. There was a big brand in the UK, Alan, wasn't there, that we were both using before, and we both suffered. I won't mention who they are just in case they decide to come after me. But yeah, I think we've nailed it on the MCT front for sure, especially the powder.
Nice, very nice.
I'll have to send you some to try, I think, Robert.
Yeah, I'll definitely give it a shot. I use MCT oil, not a ton, but I definitely will use MCT oil, especially when I'm doing the higher fat approach, at times in my preps, I'll use that as a supplement to that fat.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well, of course, MCT, or do they still believe, which I do, that it's much harder to store that as fat anyway? You burn through that and convert it to ketones. So it's probably the best fat to consume. Because funny enough, in the anabolic diet book back in the 90s, he said, do not consume MCT oil. He said, do not use that one because it will stop your own fat burning. Again, science progresses from that, and now it's predominantly the main fat for keto is MCT oil.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's a caloric load to it, so I would assume. I mean, I don't think you would. I think you would reach a GI threshold if you were going to consume all of your calories from MCT oil, and to the point where you'd be in a caloric surplus. Like that would probably not go over too well. But I think there is a caloric load to the MCT oil, so it's probably obviously metabolized differently than alcohol. But like if you ingest alcohol, that your body's going to preferentially burn that first, so it's going to get burned readily. But if you obviously consume too much alcohol, the caloric load of that is going to lead to, weight gain, fat gain.
Yeah, I agree.
Brilliant. Yeah. So I've got a question, if you will. When a client, for example, have been chronically dieting, even if it's with keto, but low calorie for some time, then they can't lose weight. Have you seen that before, where almost the metabolism seems to have slowed down because they're tracking everything right? There's I'm talking below basal metabolic rate for a long period of time. What would you do in that instance?
Yeah, so this is, I mean, reverse dieting is kind of how I kind of lump all this together. And that's something that I've been really shouting from the rooftops, because a lot of people need to go through reverse diet because a lot of people are chronically under eating, but they're not really well versed in how to do it properly. And reverse dieting is not a new concept within the bodybuilding realm, but it's also very applicable to the general population. And I honestly kind of tying this in with what we were saying earlier about, having to introduce carbs. A lot of the female people, female clientele base and female demographic that finds benefit in introducing carbs from a, returning to a normal cycle standpoint, they're oftentimes experiencing those adverse symptoms because they're chronically under eating, not because they're not eating enough carbs. If those women were to simply increase their overall caloric intake coming from both fat and protein, a lot of these hormonal issues would subside and, make no need for the carbohydrate reintroduction. But to getting back to your point of just chronically under eating in general, yeah, your metabolism is very adaptable. It will depress if you reduce your overall intake, just as it will upregulate if you increase your overall intake. People that have been chronically under eating for months and months and months, or years and years and years, that metabolism has slowed down drastically, which has also likely led to it being harder for them to maintain lean tissue. And lean tissue is very metabolically demanding as well. So they're not only depressing their metabolism by a result of not eating, but they're also depressing their metabolic demand by losing lean tissue over that time. Wow. And then they're kind of, shooting themselves in the foot, so to speak. So what I would recommend for that clientele base, that demographic, is to slowly or aggressively, depending on how they want to structure this, increase their intake over time from both fat and protein so that they can upregulate their metabolic rate, but then also optimize their body's ability to build more lean tissue and preserve the tissue they've got, which is also going to upregulate their metabolic rate. And that's also going to do wonders from a hormonal standpoint. It's going to help upregulate their testosterone production, estrogen, estradiol, all of these hormones, their leptin and ghrelin hormones, all of these hormones are going to be able to stabilize in the context of a healthy intake. If you're, consuming sub 1,000 calories on a regular basis, like, you are not going to do well. I have a 1-year-old son. When you look at what the dietary recommendations are for an infant, like with what he's eating and what his milk, what he's consuming through breast milk, he's probably consuming over 1,000 calories. Wow. And he's 24 pounds. So if you've got a full-grown adult that's consuming less than 1,000 calories, that's obviously way below what they need to consume to function and optimize their health.
Exactly what I thought. Thank you. And I've always found on keto, I can consume more calories without gaining body fat. It gives me that, and I've tested this. And again, the Lane Nortons might argue that energy is energy, but again, throw the phone at the wall sort of argument. But whoever's done keto properly knows you can take more calories. I can take 4,000 without gaining body fat. If I was eating 4,000 calories regularly of carb, I would gain fat. I would get fat because I was fat before. So
100%. I honestly don't know why that is. Like, I don't know. I've got different theories myself. But when I was bulking up before keto, I was eating 6,000 calories a day, and I bulked up to 230 pounds. And I'm 5'7", 5'8", so 230 pounds was not a good look for me. I also consumed 6,000 calories with keto for a time, and the highest I could get was like 185, 190. I could not get to 230 pounds if I wanted to. And, a calorie is a calorie is a calorie, as they say. I don't understand the math.
Jason Whitrock did it as well, and he couldn't get more than like 150 or something.
Yeah, he was doing 4,000 calories. So he and I both did that 4,000 calorie 21-day experiment.
Yeah.
But I did 6,000 calories for 3 months, and I still could not get over that 185, 190 mark. But again, if I was to consume that same caloric intake from a carbohydrate-based diet, I guarantee I would have put on a lot more adipose tissue.
Yeah, I mean, Richard, you was very overweight. This is what brought you to keto, wasn't it? You was obese, diabetic, everything.
Yeah, clinically obese, type 2 diabetic. I could barely walk up the stairs in my mid to late 20s without stopping or being severely out of breath. Gaining weight wasn't difficult for me, but I comfortably consume 5,000 to 6,000 calories per day, living a ketogenic lifestyle, compared to 2.5 or 2007, I think it was, on a carb based lifestyle. I would gain weight week on week on week. I was interested in what you just said there, because this is something we've covered a couple of times. It may be worth arranging another podcast, and we can run through some of the things that we go through and teach other people in regards to calories. Why we can. Yeah. So I don't go by calories. Not all calories are created equal. The caloric model is highly flawed because it doesn't account for a number of things. It doesn't account for the effect of insulin, the thermic effect of food, metabolic rate, ketogenesis, and a few other things that are related to seed oils and lectins, which all comes back down to insulin. Lectins, for example, bind to insulin receptors and signal the body to store 5 times more fat than insulin does itself. So if we were to put that into perspective, a piece of bread that contains 100 calories and a piece of steak that contains 100 calories, that bread is going to signal the body to store 5 times more fat than that insulin effect from the steak would. So there's a number of factors, and the uncoupling of protein 1, UCP1, when we're in a ketogenic state, it signals our white fat, our white adipose tissue, to burn and waste energy in the way that brown fat does. So we can literally just burn energy for fun. So despite consuming until we feel we're going to burst, we reach a certain point, and it's very difficult to go past that point, isn't it, as far as weight gain? But this for sure is the way forward, I think, not just for bodybuilding or for sports athletic performance, but for health and well-being. I've come away from bodybuilding. I came away from bodybuilding over a year ago, and I'm a lot smaller than I was when I was bodybuilding, but my dry protein is pretty much the same. There's not a great deal of difference, which is quite surprising. It just means I've lost volume in the muscle, but I'm almost just a smaller version of myself. Someone called me the other day. They said, you look like an action man now instead of a he-man, so it's I'll take that. But I'm still training in the gym. But I mean, I'm doing 1 or 2 times a week at the moment, because this running and cycling is the complete opposite to bodybuilding. My training has done a complete 180. But my shape is pretty much, it's still there.
It's still there.
That's the keto flex, by the way. So we'll have to get that.
Exactly. We all got to give them
the keto flex. That's it.
Go on, Robert.
Go on. Get it in. Yes, that's it.
Yeah, he's got it. I mean, with me and bodybuilding, to me, it's all about health. And bodybuilding, unfortunately, is not about health. The amount of drugs they have to take, the amount of...
They're competing for sure, yeah.
Especially competing, because, licking an ice cube on the back of the stage is not the healthiest thing. I'm actually training this summer with Dorian Yates in Marbella. I got a 4-day course with him, which I'm super excited to go. And I'm going to learn his methods. Although I use his training methods anyway, I'm going to be certified in his methods. And he is now not teaching bodybuilders. He's teaching normal people how to add muscle in as little time as possible, because he famously only spent 40 minutes per session in the gym 4 times a week. Every other bodybuilder at that time was spending hours and hours. And Arnold would famously say he was there 5 hours a day, 6 days a week. And of course, Ronnie was there all the time. And, you know, Dorian was arguably the first mass monster ever to grace the stage, certainly the first and only winner from England. So he's always been a hero to me, because I'm from just down the road from where he's from. So it's going to be amazing to finally meet him and see how he's come away from the bodybuilding to now the holistic health space spirituality that he's in. And he's all about health. So I will ask him about his diet as well, because it's interesting to see, he's 61 now, to see how he keeps himself in super healthy shape, because he's still got a 6-pack, and but he's a lot smaller. Again, he's the action man, not the He-Man. So yeah, I'm all about
awesome to see these mass monsters like still maintain their health, because that's pretty uncommon. Like Jay Cutler also still looks great and healthy.
Yeah.
You know, Dorian does, but there's honestly much fewer that look healthy still than those that have totally gone on the website. Tom Platt still looks great. But Frank Zane, but I mean, honestly, they're like the only ones that come to mind. Most of the other ones have really gone downhill post competition seasons.
Exactly. And yeah, it's unfortunately there's not so many of the legends around anymore, but let's meet them while we can. But that was amazing, guys. I have to go and get the boy from school now. Is there anything else we need to talk about on this one? But we should definitely do this again. Let's jump on yours, Robert.
Yeah. Y'all are both welcome on mine. I'd love to peel the curtain back and dive even deeper. We can talk about the running and the cycling. I'd love to kind of learn more about how you're fueling for that, because that's a whole nother realm. Like, people assume that you have to have carbohydrates for anything endurance related. So yeah, I'd love to pick your brain there. Brilliant. And then obviously we can chat with you, Alan, how you have found the proverbial fountain of youth and just keep getting younger with each year that passes.
Yeah, I've got 20 years on you.
Yeah.